Oh, I didn't make you an organizer. Hey there, guys. Everybody who's joining, give me a second if you are coming in on social media, Facebook or Twitch. Let me just make sure that everything is working. Tomas, I made you an organizer. All right, and working. Tomas, I made you an organizer. All right, and
I could get used to my new glasses.
Tomas, I made you an organizer. All right, man, that Facebook has a nice little bug for us. Okay, give me a second, guys. If you're joining us here, you should be seeing Tomas's screen. If you're seeing this on Facebook, give me a quick shout out. Let me know that you can see it. I'm gonna head over to the different places. I see it's working over here, and let's get ourselves check in YouTube and make sure it's live. I got to do a quick little edit, and then we should be good. And audio is off there. Live with. Okay.
Has anyone written anything in chat, or am I just still not getting anything in chat?
Hold on one sec. I think let me make sure that audio's off. Give me 1 sec. I just gotta check Twitch.
Yeah.
It's always a mad scramble to make sure these are working.
Oh, I know. Yeah. Well, you know, I'm like,
All right, guys, everything looks like it's working. So I'm checking over here on Facebook. I see Brian. I see Daniel. Hey, Skyla. I've also checking over here on YouTube. I see Lewis, B Lanes, Wakazen, Martin, Cadaverous over here on in GoToWebinar. We've got a couple of people, and let's see, Tomas, you should be seeing it in the questions, not the chat section.
Oh! I always forget that.
Yeah,
sorry.
That's the switch with GoToWebinar. So, guys, let me give you a quick introduction on what we're going to be doing today. Well, I don't know what the conversation is actually, so we're going to be learning that together. Hold on, let me just get my software up. There we go. All right, you can all see me. So I have Tomas Wittelsbach, who has actually been at the forefront of a lot of things happening in 3D printing and in jewelry art and this kind of nexus. I mean, he was one of the first people to really push what ZBrush could do. And during my time working there, Tomas was always that crazy guy that was just like putting so much detail into things, and we just didn't even know where this stuff was going. And now we're gonna kind of look at where it all goes, where it's going, and what you guys can do, and just really give you a good introduction to Tomas, who's got a class at a couple of different sites. He's also doing you're doing a ZBrush Live thing, right?
Yeah. Well, the Pixelogic Live.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it ZBrush Live? It's Pixelogic on Twitch, ZBrush Live. Yeah, I think it is ZBrush.
Okay, so every 2 weeks you're showing up there and helping people understand what this is all about, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Yeah.
So for those who are more at the beginning stage of this, why don't you just give us a sense of what you do and what you do today?
Oh, all right. So, well, now I teach a lot more than I ever thought I would.
Yeah.
I left grad school saying, oh, I don't need grad school. I'm never going to teach. And, well, look. But really, for the most part, I shifted from the film industry and then discovered ZBrush and started doing jewelry and product design. And we've been doing a lot of like right now, I'm starting a company with some business partners that is body jewelry. Mm-hmm. And then also with another business partner, we're doing earrings and accessories, completely different markets. One's very femmy and fashiony, and the other one's, body jewelry.
Yeah.
But I get hired in a lot as consultants to help companies tune their ZBrush usage for their product, if that makes sense.
Totally.
And then I do figures and toys and all kinds of sunglasses, accessories, So now I'm kind of trying to broaden that spectrum. Tables, excuse me.
I
So
wish we could talk about some of the other stuff too, but I think we'll have to leave this PG. So there's some.
yeah, no, exactly. I was like,
I got one too many complaints
hey,
after the last time we talked about it.
really?
Oh yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. All right. So, so a lot of what you do now is teaching, and we've talked a lot about this idea of CAD mine. And in ZBrush in the early days, there was always this polygonal modeling mindset. So, tell me, what is it? What's ZBrush to you? How do you use it? How's it important to you?
Well, I think so. Let me explain CAD mine. A lot of people in the jewelry industry, it's something I fight regularly.
Mm-hmm.
It comes down to people who think that like this 10,000th, a hundredth of a millimeter precision is super important. And yes, in some ways it is, if you have mechanical things and this and that, but none of that's going to be resolved in the computer, because no matter what these people think, and yes, the more precise your model, your shrinkages and all of that become less instrumental, but until you've done something 10 times, cast it 10 times, and you see where it's shrinking, you adjust your models to it. There's no such thing as an accurate first model in jewelry or in anything that's going to be cast, because we've averaged it out where we're getting about 3% shrinkage in our parts. But how a piece shrinks, like this piece is hollow now, and it's one of the reasons I've hollowed these out, but also I put vignettes in them. But now roughly everything's about the same thickness, where when I first started doing this was solid. And the shrinkage of this forehead area compared to here was different because this cooled first. And so, it starts to pull up and into the shape. So you're no longer getting a perfect circle. It worked because I had plenty of room. I could hammer in an anvil or my mandrel and stretch it out to my size or grind it out. But I mean, precision, this concept that, I don't have a bounding box you hear it all the time still, which just blows me away, is that, ZBrush isn't very accurate in measuring. And I'm like, well, actually, we go up here and we go update size ratio, and, that's your bounding box. That is the size of the bounding box of this object, right? That's your X, Y, and Z. And it's accurate, because if we come over here, how many how many points behind this decimal are we getting? That's 5 points. What is that, a 10,000th of a millimeter? It's just, that's more accurate than anything you're going to put out ever. And so the CAD mind is this concept of, oh God, this has to be 1/3000th of a millimeter or it won't blah, 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 blah. And it's just like, you know what? Buy a printer for your home, print the thing out, look at it, wear it. And that's where your accuracy comes from you wearing and playing with these things, where a lot of people who have these programs that are incredibly accurate and, they're used to, being able to go like this and this. And it's like, oh, well, I have, that's 1/10,000th of a millimeter.
Right.
You have a variation of 3 to 5, in some metals 12% shrinkage. How are you going to predict that other than doing it and then measuring it? That computer is never going to predict what that shrinkage is. And so that's why I kind of fight with people in the sense of trying to resolve problems that you're never going to actually be able to resolve beforehand. And I'm not saying you can be completely lax. I do use appropriate ring sizes. I do, and then we see where it comes out. And then for production, you change your models to those first couple casts.
Right.
And so that's where ZBrush, being a sculpture program, allows you to kind of wrap your head around things in a dimensional, we hit Y, we go like this, and that's how wide that thing is. And it's like people are like, oh, well, that's not accurate. Well, what do you mean that's not accurate? That's incredibly accurate. Once again, we're 4 decimal points off a mil. I don't know how much more accurate you want to get. It's just that it's now a ruler instead of the computer. So it's much more like a sculpting tool. And Caliper Master, the plugin Caliper Master, has a thing where you could tap here, tap here, tap here, tap here. So you're getting the measurement along the surface.
All right. Well,
And
let me stop you there before we kind of lose people who are not all that technical on this side of it yet. So if we were talking about what ZBrush is and what you use this for, I think this is a really important thing to just keep real simple, because you can be using CAD, and in jewelry is the big component here. So what is some of the software alternatives that you have or people use?
So it's Rhino
Yep.
and or Matrix.
Yep.
And Matrix is the largest plugin in the universe that sits on top of Rhino.
Right. Okay.
And Matrix is really a WYSIWYG program for, I wish I had it open. I don't have all my disks, so I can't reinstall the program.
Yeah.
But basically it's like a ring size slider, and then you have different heads, and you can, so it's almost like a digital Lego program for jewelry.
Okay.
And then you can go in and do more customizing, but sometimes the customizing, it's a lot of sliders like this, and you're like, oh, well, let's increase it, let's decrease, so it's sort of a design program for all, where you don't necessarily have to have a lot of design skills and or a lot of CAD skills. You can go in and a lower level CAD and or designer can come in and create pieces that are perfectly acceptable.
Okay, great. And so this, just to interrupt, sorry. So in the CAD world, and with Rhino and with Matrix, they allow you to create these kind of complex shapes that you might see at Jared's or something like that. Some jewelry store. So now in your case, you're taking this as a standalone jewelry artist who is creating his own work, his own brand. And so what is some of the tools that you use inside of ZBrush that really help you get this detailed?
Well, yeah, now there are all kinds. Really what's funny is I use clay tubes for the most part.
Right.
That's my biggest usage tool.
Yeah.
And I just got rid of it. But now with the Boolean tool stuff, you can get a lot of extremely high precision interfaces. I might have a picture. Well, we'll look at a picture of mold in a bit, where you can get things that fit together, key together incredibly tightly, where before you'd have to smooth it out and then you finish it and smooth it out and finish it, and then your edges are always a nightmare.
Yeah.
Where now with the Boolean stuff, you can define hinges, you can define planes that key together incredibly well.
Okay, so let's can we see the front of this?
Yeah.
So how many polygons are your models usually? I know we've talked about this before.
Well, normally
a million, a gajillion.
Yeah, normally I will do a rough block up.
Yeah.
As low as I possibly can. So, like if it's 500 to 1,000, that's great.
Yeah.
And then what I try to do is get anywhere between 7 and 8 subdivision levels. So I like to start working anywhere in that 2 to 6, 7 million range.
Yeah.
Is where I start working. This isn't a good model because this has been Dynamesh. Both these are decimated. One sec. Let me see if I have something that has a foundation in it.
Oh, I love that one with the mouth is covered. That looks awesome.
That guy, he has a little bandana.
Yeah.
All these are later in the process. Do I have something that? No, I pulled up the wrong file. I thought that was the one that had the bases in it.
I remember this though.
Yeah, these are the insides of the. Let's see if it'll. No, it only has one lower. These are. So the hollows in these rings, these all came off roughly the same base ring, just because I know that this shape is the same. And so when I'll often put scenes on the insides of the rings, and then that way there's sort of something to. Jewelry is funny. It's sort of like there you go. There's Fudo in him. Jewelry, becomes landmarks in people's lives. And what I found that if you put stuff on the inside of it, that's sort of like the secret for the person, and they can choose to share it or not. And those little stories, I think, really give the pieces sort of legs. It's not just, oh, this ring, I bought this ring with this inside it, and I can share that with someone. And I find that that's really and you can see here how I made him where he's looking at you through the bottom of the ring, so you're making eye contact with Fudo inside, as opposed to just looking at it. And just little things like that are things that you're like, oh look, he's looking at us. You know, I know that sounds silly, but those little stories are the things that really really make jewelry personal, you know, because jewelry is one of the few truly interactive arts where, you know, if I'm making big abstract bronzes, I don't necessarily care if you understand what my story is going into it. You know, I have a story for everything I do, but whether you get it isn't necessarily important. That's just a structure for me to work on. Where here, well, the people have to associate with that story because they're telling stories themselves. You know, so jewelry is an incredibly personal art form where you are completely dependent on interaction with the viewer and then in turn the purchaser, you know. And so yeah, that was, you know, so that's why I specifically use these internal bases, so I can come in and this one is off of, I did a whole bunch of the tarot card trumps. I think that's decimated. Yeah, here's the sculpt. The tarot card trump. So this is the High Priestess. It's the second trump. And so I have a whole bunch of these like little Day of the Dead vignettes that tie to the tarot cards.
Yeah.
And that way, when you order the ring, you can order the trump that you more associate with. So now you have this customizable story that you're tying to the parts.
Great.
And I think that's the thing about jewelry, is that it unlike most things, it's a personal thing, because unlike a toy or a painting or something, that is something that you're identifying with, and in turn by hanging it on a wall, you're associating with it.
Yeah.
But jewelry we wear in public. These are the billboards and the banners that we wear to associate ourselves with things. You know, they're like little patches or badges that you're tying yourself to something, an idea. And so it's better to create with that in mind.
Great.
You know.
Well, you know, one of the things I think would be really neat to do today, if you have time and if it works, I really want to give sense. I know this is a Q&A, guys, so if you have questions, start asking them. I'm going to start feeding them to you, but this is your chance to ask somebody who's been doing this jewelry arts for a long time, successfully, and really pushing the quality of this stuff. But if you don't mind, Tomas, I think it would be really cool if we get a sense of how you work.
Sure.
So what I'm really looking for is, like, for example, there was some email exchange somebody just had where you were talking about the over and under, and also the way in which you look for the specularity or the line quality to tell you, you know, if something's in the right relief. Like, it might be a great moment for us to talk about ornamentation and design within relief, like this.
Sure. And so, well, let's leave this up. Let's just append to a flat plane, and we'll kind of go over brushes and the concept of specularity and surfaces. Yes. I can't believe we don't have, you still have to convert that. I have Y on it. Yep. All right, so let's take this, convert this to polycube frame.
Are you using that whole gizmo thing to create primitives a lot?
I am, actually. I think it's great because you really have control over your geometry. The one thing that, and once again, it just could be me because I'm too lazy to actually learn how to use tools sometimes, where if you're doing it, and some of them have the accept and some of them don't.
Yeah.
So like I changed the size of it, you know, we're now here, but then when I come back here and push cube, it jumps back to the old size.
Right.
That's the one thing I haven't quite come to grips with yet, but we're working on it. Okay, so here we go. And let's just divide the living hijibas out of this.
Or if everybody, what I'm really wanting you guys to notice and pay attention to is process. Tomas has been teaching classes with me for a really long time. And one of the things that I notice in this, both in his work and also in the students' response to it, is that there's an enormous amount of process and trusting the process. And so it goes back to that CAD mind where we want everything to be kind of perfect right from the beginning. Like we're going to have this thing, this line or this shape that kind of moves out this way, and we're going to focus on, okay, that's a 30, 40, 50, 60-degree arc or something like that, and inputting the numbers into that. But what I've noticed with Tomas is that he just goes for it with the clay brush, and it looks more beautiful because it has just a more naturalistic quality. It doesn't mean it's rough. And that's what we have to do. It's this balance between, this naturalistic handmade versus, this precision sterility.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I think that if you get so caught up in what it's supposed to be, you completely miss what it can be. And I think those are two really important differences. I very rarely start with graphic images. I always sort of allow these are much more meditations for me in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, when I'm working for a company, if it's FSU symbol, we start with the FSU, okay, fine. But when I'm working for myself, I have a rough concept of where I'm heading,
Yeah.
but people are always like, oh, well, how do you get rid of your hash marks? And I'm like, well, I'm using those hash marks. And especially now with the clay tubes, it really functions like a layer tool. It doesn't build up like clay buildup does. And so you can lay one layer in and then you come in and lay another layer in. And you know that you are now gradually building. That's one step, that's two steps, that's three steps, that's down one step, that's down two steps. And
and this is a clay tubes brush, guys, by the way. So what this does, the difference between this and clay buildup is if you go into the brush and it's down in samples or one of those subpalettes, the buildup setting is turned off.
Yeah, see how as I stroke on that, it'll just keep building,
keep adding
up.
And adding, yeah.
And that has its uses. I will use clay buildup for certain things, but normally the clay buildup, when I use clay buildup, is like I already have let's say I like this line, I might come in and use clay buildup, and it has nice soft round surfaces. It's sort of a pillowy brush,
yeah.
And so whoa,
how did we get there?
That's not smooth. I'm like, that's not smooth. Okay, wow, I'm sloppy tapping today. So I don't worry about these strokes. I'm just going to go through this real quick, and then we'll hop to. Because when I'm laying in my shapes, really, this is how I lay forms in. Like I'll come in and why I use clay tubes and why I do it this way at a high resolution is, as you can see, clay tubes leaves these edges, right? You can see how it's leaving a nice sharp edge. And these are sort of the flavors that I'm hunting for, the subtlety and form that I'm hunting for when I'm blocking up. And so I'm like, oh, well, there's a step. And only at this higher resolution is it leaving these defined forms that I can then come back in, I'll fill that in. I'm like, oh, well, let's knock this back because I like this edge. Is that coming under there? Oh, well, that's sort of like that. And only at a high resolution are you getting those, the dynamics of the edges as you're blocking in.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's not concrete, but it allows me to make decisions that I'm seeing within my block up. And this is how I sculpt in clay. And we have rake, and in clay, we use rake tools to define our surfaces so we can see how that surface is laying, if it's scooping, if it, how it catches light. I think the rake tool is just a little aggressive. It doesn't quite work like a rake tool in clay. And so I found that clay tubes is serving my functions as the rake tool in normal clay.
Mm-hmm.
And also because it's functioning sort of like a layer brush where it won't build up, it allows me to define my steps. And we'll get into what I mean by my steps here in a second. It allows me to define my steps cleanly without being stressed that I'm building up or taking away too much. So it's a very controlled way of defining your surfaces. And, then I can come in, I can say, oh, like that, like that. Then I can lower my resolution, because everyone's always like, oh, well, how do you get all this
Clean
hash marks
edges.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is if you have your multi layers or your um, oh gosh, um, your subdivision layers, good golly, um, you can come back in, you can keep what you want, and then ditch what you don't. You just, it's a patient step of just coming through. And a lot of people just want this to be done in one shot.
Right.
And if you're just doing it in one shot, you're not going through, you don't know what's going on those surfaces. I mean, I know what's happening on these surfaces and I can make decisions about it. And, you know, if you're just laying it in once, you know, I don't think there's an easy way to get to any of this. So don't be scared to redo stuff. You know, the other thing, and this is something I don't necessarily fight, but
What brush are you using right now? This is you
that's
switched
a
brushes
pinch
on this.
brush.
Pinch.
Yeah, I shifted the pinch just to pull those edges together real quick because I'm doing a quick cleanup. Back the tubes, and then you can see with the clay tubes, I can really see what that surface is doing.
Oh yeah, there we go. This is actually one of your kind of trademarks. I always see it.
Yeah.
This kind of little ribbing.
Yeah, and that gives us, it allows me to see what the surface is, but it also forces your eye to do what I want it to do. Ridging and ribbing they're telling the story I want to be told. You know, I want you to read that as a scoop. And by scooping it and leaving those contour lines on it, I'm defining how your eye reacts to my surfaces. And so in jewelry, you have to remember, and I would argue honestly in everything, but in jewelry, it's a little bit more important because we are dealing with polished metals for the most part. We aren't just sculpting objects. We are sculpting in light reflection. So, you know, I can sculpt, you know, a little happy face with ears. And, you know, that's not going to read as anything. You're still doing this graphically. And the difference between sculpting graphically and then sculpting dimensionally is a big deal. And it's until you kind of wrap your head around what it means, you know, you're not going to get reflective surfaces that are telling the story that you want them to tell. So let's go over just some really quickie things here. Well, let's just plane that off. So the difference between illustrating and sculpting. So these are what I consider my line brushes or my line drawing brushes. They have very different usages. So this is sharp. And then this, oh, that was that one. No, that was right. This, boy, that dynamic staying on is still tricky. Supposedly there's a script that'll keep that from doing it, but and once again, until I have the time and energy and wherewithal to find the script, I'm always like, wah. Okay, so these are the three basic different line tools that I use. And when I say line, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to come in here and actually draw a line. And that is going to come up as a dark graphic on my surface. And hold on, let's bring up ink metal so we can just see some of the stuff that, that's fine. So let's go to this. All right, so this one has line detail. So you can see I'm drawing these in here as well. And those are what I consider a graphic line. So I'm thinking of that as like pen and ink. I want it to be flat. You know, I don't really, it's not really selling dimension, it's selling a visual rhythm. Like here too, you see this isn't meant to be dimensional, it's meant to be textural. Do you see the difference?
I'm not
And
seeing your
so,
cursor on the browser for some reason, but the top or the bottom one you're basically referring to, I think.
well, the middle one, just see the hash marks along the
Yep.
cheekbone,
Yep.
the hash marks along the back there, and
Yep.
then on the top one, these along the tube. Those are really just meant to be a graphic, right? Like a visual, so that's me drawing in lines.
Yes.
Now what that is your brain is still going to register that as one surface, right? That then has lines drawn on it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a texture. Now, and this is what I mean by my line tools. These are the ones I use. Now, I use these for different ways and different reasons. One, see how wide this one is. And here, let's do a cutaway. Boop. All right. So you can see that this has a nice, big, flat, round. This is going to come out as a nice, deep, dark line, right? Now this one comes out as a dark line, but it has bright edges because this tool kind of gives you this roll on. See how it gives you like this slight bulge right here?
Totally.
That slight bulge creates a different reflectivity. So when you're looking at the edge, you got to remember that you're getting the light off of that angle, right?
Yeah.
And so when you have something that is like this, and then like this, light, 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 oh, light, 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 light. So you wind up with these difference, the light reflection is very different. And here, let's get a metallic in here. The difference in how, okay, so see that's reflecting right there? That is a flat surface reflection. So think about foil wrappers and things like that. Anything that's really flat, there's a point where that whole surface is reflecting towards you.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a non-complex reflection, right? So the whole thing is reflecting in that direction. But you can see over here, the scoop, it has all this tonal change. And as you move it, it's moving along. Where here, this is either on or off, where this is a transitional light, right? And so when we come over to our little guys over here, you can see that we have this bright edge here.
Mm-hmm.
You can see that this goes down and in, and there's a lot of room for reflection in there.
Yeah.
And this is edgeless. It just goes, right? And so these are very different ways those lines are going to reflect. And that's just how you draw a line on the surface. And so when you start contemplating pieces or sculptures, we're dealing with how the light is coming off of them. And you have to remember, and why I use the Mod Dirty Blue, is this is the closest material to the amount of shadow and reflection as I've found yet. There's also one of the base grays that does pretty well, but I don't particularly care about for working in black and white. But what you have to remember, doing this to your model doesn't mean that you're getting better reflections. This is all manufactured. This is inside a computer. This is not a three-dimensional object. This is a signifier for a three-dimensional object. And the computer is trying to figure out the reflectivity, the shadow depth and this and that. And you can change it with the slider up here. And so picking your material is really important because where's that hot iron? Here, you're working on this all day and let's get this. And you're like, oh, I really love these subtle little lines. No, that's a little steep. You're like, oh, this works out well. I really want this to be, kind of soft and I like the stepping. And now we come to Mod Dirty Blue and it's not even there.
Yeah.
You can kind of see it, but the fact is that is not going to show up. It goes through one polish, all of that's gone. So wrapping your head around the actuality of what detail is there and is not has a lot to do with material selection.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I really say use the Mod Dirty Blue, because it gives you, so far, the most realistic implication of what you can expect.
Well, that actually dovetails in with what Luis Gomez is asking. Guzman. If this is intended to be 3D printed with or in iron, gold, silver, PVC, what about the details? If it's silver, for example. So you're kind of addressing this right now, but as you go through different materials, if you know it's going to be silver, do you sculpt this differently?
Yes and no. I will initially sculpt for design.
Mm-hmm.
And what I wind up with is what I would consider a render model. And so I put, here, let's go to this guy. Here, this guy's fine. You know, I'm coming in here and I'm putting the texture where I want it. And I'm going to put the detail where I want it. And let's say, hold on, let me get, and let's say I want a stone set here, right? And so I'm just going to put these little guys in here, and these are prongs. Okay, great. Well, now I have a stone set. Woo, look at that. Set stone. The problem is, in reality, these things need to be, about, and obviously I'm doing this quickly, but these need to be about that tall, so they can then come in and hammer this metal down over the stone and da-da-da-da-da. So there are certain details that if you actually want them to hold up, you will need to come in and boost it afterwards. I think, does this one have the sugar skull in it? Yeah, here. And this has been decimated already. But you can see how some of this stuff pokes up a little higher than you would think it would. Mm-hmm. These little things become very bright because they get polished down very easily. And so, it took years for me to figure out the right depths of how and what shows. So yes and no. So if I'm doing something that's going to be only gold or only platinum, right now I'm doing stuff that's in stainless steel, and we have yet to develop the polishing techniques for that. You will do it slightly differently, only because in silver, at least everything that I do, the sulfuring process is a big part of it. So I know that if I'm putting little lines in here, they can be small because those are going to wind up to be high contrast. Those will be black on silver. Where in gold, I would probably use larger, flatter bottom lines because it does not, gold doesn't tarnish, so you can't oxidize the surface. So either you're going to use an artificial blackener, so basically it's paint, right? Either you're going to paint the surface, or you're going to do it with texture, so you'll sandblast it and then high polish, and that's the contrast. And you see that a lot in that Chinese statuary, like just the Chinese gold statuary. They really do a great job of using that sandblasted surface versus the high contrast surface, and they get beautiful detail differences that way. But you'll notice that it's not a lot of that linear detail. You wind up with big sections that are drop set, right? Yeah. Now that'll be down below the surface, and then this will get sandblasted and this will be high polished, so that'll show you that contrast. But to be deadly honest, for most of what I do, no, I will sculpt them the same way. And then you just kind of figure out what sort of tarnishing or oxidizing strategy you want to use. Most people, like for most like bridal and stuff like that, you're doing very little contrast, so it doesn't really matter.
If I can segue this to another direction, I think there's a couple of things I really want to do to showcase, just how awesome you are and all the skill that you have. And one of the things, and tell me if you think this fits in with what you're doing, but one of the things that really struck me as just amazing was Louis Sullivan ornamentation.
Oh, yeah.
And complex ornamentation like that. I didn't actually prepare. I didn't think about it, anything for this Louis Sullivan ornamentation. But most of us know Louis Sullivan as the father of function over form. But
function over form.
Yeah. But I mean, that dude knew form.
Oh yeah, what's so funny because he's like, I mean, the apex of form, or of I mean, it's like, how could you say that that's form over function? It's this
Right.
huge ornate writhy thing that's a
Yeah.
window. It's like,
Yeah.
I think terminology is really funny, and how it's thought about after the fact,
Uh-huh.
because uh, his form is really one, as far as I'm concerned, the apex of Nouveau, the actuality
Yeah.
of Nouveau architecture. I mean, those banks with the bricks carved out and stuff, there's just nothing like it. The Austrians did a good kick, but I'm sorry,
Yeah,
let's face it.
I'd never seen it actually, because he's known as the father of kind of modern architecture to some extent, in terms of this, in
And
terms
the
of the,
high rise,
yeah,
you know,
which as soon as I saw that ornamentation, I was just, blown away. So, make sure you guys Google that. Great. Tomas is going to show us some of this. You guys can kind of get a sense of what it is. But I'd love it if we could have like a little, some kind of quick demo, just how you approach something like this. That gets us into the
sure.
over under, and then it also gets us into how you just start to create such layered complexity, which
Yeah, sure.
you've been doing this a while.
I mean, just look at that. Are you kidding me?
Yeah,
I
form,
mean,
form, form.
yeah. How do you say that that's form or function over form? It's like, dude, look at that. Come on. You're crazy.
Yeah.
Uh, so, and yeah, that door is real important there, don't you think? So here, let's just go back to this. So yeah, the same in the concepts of Celtic knots. There's everything over and under has to make some sort of sense. And I'm doing this sort of mandalia stuff with my business partner, and we're doing all these things that's over and under and over and under. And you come out to the ends of intersections, and you're like, well, does this go up? Does it go down? Should it be under? Should it be over? And it's tricky stuff. So really, I approach it either two ways. One, we can do it just here. Let's trim front so this is flat. So you can use
That's a brush people don't know very well. Trim front. Love it.
So trim front's a really important tool as far as I'm concerned in jewelry, because what it allows you to do, and flatten now sort of does this. The flatten thing in here.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Because you can take something. No, okay, this is composed. Delete lower. No, hold on. Let's duplicate that and delete lower. And then we come back up here and undo that, delete lower, because this still has our subdivisions. And what I use trim front for, and it's important, is like I'll find a plane and then I'll use trim front. And that gives me something that I know is always 90 degrees to my my world axis.
Yeah.
And so it's just a way to really make sure that you have things that are like 90 degrees to one another. Okay, I'll go here and then I'll come over here and I'll trim front this down. And this way I know that these are 90 degrees to one another.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a really good just anchor for your dynamic. I got to remember when I restart, because all these dynamics. Okay. And so, and there we go. So now we know that this is 90 degrees to this. And so it's an important thing to know, because like if you're on your ring and you're flattening your top, I just use it as a foundation. So I always know where my planar foundations are.
Mm-hmm.
I use planar flat a lot as well. So here we're going to drag this out, and now everybody is, there. Now that is 90 to my seam. Remember that planar flatten is a destructive tool in some ways. you can see here how it is pulling this stuff up to this edge. So you're with planar flatten, you're loading the edge and you're distorting the side, where planar doesn't do that. It just cuts, but it also won't bring the material up. So that's sort of that. Now, one of the ways I found to use the topology brush, and you can kind of get your swirl in, you can get your divisions in. We'll go.
What are you drawing with right now?
This is the topology brush.
Oh, okay. I haven't seen you use this.
I use it. I found that it's a good way of generating these forms. Normally, I'll do this with just a cube.
Yeah.
Right. And then I'll just stretch these out. And then I was talking to one of the students. I was like, okay, you're having problems. They're just having problems visualizing the curve in cubes.
I understand.
So you can take this sort of flat and, this is a way to generate some quick geometry. And it should, come on. Is it not? Why is it not? Why does it never work when I'm demoing anything?
This brush still confuses me, even though I know it's still.
You're supposed to just tap it, and it's supposed to make. Wow. Okay. Well, if you guys can figure out how to tap that and get that geometry to come out, send me a letter.
Let's wait for the delay. I'm sure there is somebody that's got an answer. I like to leave it.
Oh, there we go. So I held down the Alt key.
There you go.
And tapped it. So, right? And so now you just split mask points. Boom. Well, actually, should have done it the other way around. Should have missed split unmasked points.
Oops,
and now sneeze. I can.
Sorry, folks.
And so you can come in. Oops, I went the wrong direction. Yeah. And once again, do your crossing. Oops. You can't be sloppy like I am. These have to be clean. So this is a pretty quick way. And what's nice about this is that if you have a curved surface, you can generate the geometry on the surface. And so it's not the Alt. How crimey. No? Why am I having, I used to just tap it. Why is it being so weird?
Christopher saying Alt click. Let me see if anybody else is being useful on this.
Oh, well, maybe it's, yeah. Okay, so I alted and then hit the front button. I don't know. Okay. And so split masked points. And so now you have, did everybody get masked? Okay, split the parts then. You want to be persnickety about it? Fine, there, split the parts. And so now this is a way to generate some geometry. Now you can see where it's a little more logical. Oops, what did I hit? Okay. A little bit more logical and useful here. Let's say if you wanted to do something like this. And now this is a really bad breakup. And now tap. Okay, there. See, for some, I just tapped it. And I thought that was what it was. But so now you have a very controllable thing that you can come back in with ZModeler, and now you can, oh, come on, everybody. Oh, what's it doing? Oh, escape. It shouldn't be thinking that much on a simple ZModeler thing. So, but here you can, by using the topology, you can create a fundamental base mesh that then in turn is editable. I used to only use, like, I would just mask this off and then extract it, right? I did that a lot.
Yeah.
And then I would have to Z-remesh that to get, and someone, I can't even remember who it was like, why aren't you using the topology brush? And I'm like, the topology what? I'm like, oh yeah, the topology brush. So I'm always, remember you going, well, why aren't you using Z-remesher? And I'm like, Z-remesher sucks. What are you talking about? You're like, no, that was the beta testing. And I was like, oh, my brain writes things off. And okay, I don't know what the hell I did here. We're gonna reboot real quick. Yeah. I love it. When I demo, I get goofy hand where I'm like, oh.
That's probably just some little bug.
Where's ZBrush? Get up here. Boop.
Oh, man, you have them color coded. Wait,
we're back. Woohoo! Maybe.
We're back.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Insane. Okay. What the heck could it have been thinking about?
I don't know. And look, it's still thinking. Look, it's just that one cube. Isn't that crazy?
All
right, ZBrush, you're loony. All right, so let's just kill this. Now, this is Cisternal's Process Explorer. What I love about it is that you can grab this and drag it onto things, and it shows you what process it is. And because I can't see prompt my way out of a paper bag, it's real important for me to have a way of kill process. That was super weird. Okay, boop. Boop.
All right, back to regularly scheduled programming here, guys. Get your questions out. Now is the time to start asking so we can get some stuff in. And tell me, what do you learn? What are you learning so far? Like, I'd love to hear from you guys what you're finding, little nuggets or something that maybe we didn't think was really important, but you think is really incredibly important. I'd love to hear that. Post it in
me
Facebook.
Too. It's so funny. Still, after all this time of teaching the class, I never know. I'm just like, is anyone getting anything out of this? And everyone's like, yeah, this is great. I'm like, okay.
But you're in this all the time. I mean, how many, you counted it once?
Oh, well, did I not? So I've been doing my quick saves, right? I save all of my quick saves. And if you guys are going to be professional jewelers, I would recommend saving your quick saves, because what that is, it's a provenance of the creation of objects in case you get into intellectual property contention. You can show the entire history of the evolution of the piece, where if someone just copied you, they're going to have like 2 iterations of it, maybe. And so you can prove where the design came from, and that's a big deal to the courts. So once quick save happens, I save all of I have 10 terabytes of quick saves.
Wow.
And so from 2013 to now, I have over 4,000 quick saves that I can find.
Yeah.
I'm missing a few batches of time in my drives. I haven't consolidated them all. But right now, that's 4,000, it's 4,020, 22 or something like that. But we're just going to round to 4,000. So I now have my quick save set at 30 minutes, but at the early times, it was sort of every 20 minutes. So you multiply 4,000 times 20, divide it by 3, and that's how many hours you have. Well, I have 28,000 hours of quick saves in 5 years. Now that's almost 3 years solid out of the 5 years.
It's pretty hardcore.
So, yeah, it's stupid. It just shows you that I'm an OCD wingnut that never leaves my computer. But I have 28,000 hours into this in the last 5 years, and I've been doing this pushing 11 years, right?
All right. So this stream sometimes dies on Facebook and YouTube after an hour. Might be the bit streaming. I'm still trying to figure out why it does that. And so this may die out for you guys. Make sure you head over to the go to webinar approach, or over on YouTube that tends to stay. So why don't we, for like just a couple more minutes, if you don't mind, keep it just one simple thing. We won't go as
Yeah,
complex
yeah.
as Lewis Sullivan, but where was it here?
So my block up or my process.
Yeah, there was one. Hey, Tomas. So there was one note about like how you do simple floral patterns, and not simple like other people simple. I mean Tomas
Right, right.
floral patterns.
So the floor or like the I assume that they're talking about like the engraving florals, like the flourishes, would
Yeah,
be my guess.
and that might give us some
Um,
of the sculpting approach and process if it's just because what
yeah,
I'm looking for is like just I want to show them just inside of sculpting,
yeah.
and the sculpting tools how you use those.
Okay, so let's go to cube. How's let me see. Sorry, I'm a big ding dong. Delete lower. Okay, so we'll come here, go to cube, and we will make this 0, make this 0, make that 0. All right, Z modeler. Let's do this, and let's get some geometry. And so this is normally like how I start. Often you'll start with a graphic or something like that, but we'll just do a flourish here. So I do my blocks and I get on a plane, right? And turn your floor on so you see where you are. Oh, that's the Fudo tattoo. All right, so we look at it. We know that the blue line points towards the back and the red line towards the left, and now you are facing front. And then that is probably the top. So we know that, all right, now we're on axis, so we turn our floor off. And then
Was that a reference
go
image
to,
in there on the floor?
yeah, that was this guy's Fudo tattoo.
Okay.
Remember you saw the Fudo on the inside of that ring?
Mm-hmm.
That was based on, he had a tattoo and he wanted it represented in his thing. Hold on, I can't even find floor again. So that's sort of his, oh, that's the wrong side. There you go.
Got it.
And so I based the Fudo on the inside of the ring on his tattoo.
Nice.
Yeah. And so you can see there, we did use a reference.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's turn floor off and let's get back to here. All right, so I get that, and then I go to move points and then X, Y, Z infinite because I'm not going to be subtle right now. I'm doing a one plane view and it winds up being faster. So I can just come in, I can drag this, drag this, drag this, we'll drag this, drag this, drag this, drag this. It's going to come up here, 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 here. And so we just kind of get our form sort of where we want it. And a lot of this is just, learning what you want your forms to be like.
Mm-hmm.
I've done so many of these flourishes that, it's sort of like second nature.
Yeah, I was talking to Seth Thompson, I think that's how you say his last name. He's an environment artist high up over there at Blizzard. And I was pointing your work out to him. He hadn't actually seen your work. And how you do this ornamentation. And Seth's got some pretty cool stuff he's doing ornamentation-wise. So this is great. I'm glad you're showing this.
Yeah, and so then, and see, I wasn't on axis when I moved those, and see how they moved off axis. So you want to stay on axis. Come back out here. And I know that it's hard to pull off surfaces. That's why you'll see me just kind of do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll drag these around. So I tend to work off of, try to stay on the one axis first, because we'll get our dimensional depth in a minute, off of the transition. So here, let's, yeah. And so, yeah, we got that. Let's kick this back up and around a little. Okay, that's fine, and then this will come off and go the other direction. And so most of this floral stuff sort of functions off contrapposto, you know, one direction, then the other, then another. So that's how the scroll work is sort of set up, or the traditional scroll work is sort of set up, you know. And you'll notice that I don't, like here, I don't try to do that. I'll always come out one way and then try to come back in and organize these around, because if you do want to come back later and let's say, you know, put a line in something, so you want to make this a ridge. If you do it, you see how I came off the side here, it's going to follow that axis. So you can see here, we can stay within our axes, or it's going to follow the line of the directionality of the faces of the cubes.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to stay like here. I noticed that that's a mistake. So what I'll do is I'll come back around like this, and then I'll pull this here. At least if you want them to be contiguous,
Mm-hmm.
You know, because now if I come in, I do this, and I want a decorative ridge on that outside, I can do that. And now you can see it's following the line. And I know it's a lot easier often to do this and then do this. It just winds up making it harder on you later if you want to do any kind of an easy solution for, you know, little details like this. You know, it's just a lot easier if you keep it on the same train sort of thing. Okay, so now really I don't go much farther than that. I really, unless there's a real reason to get into the block up, precision in the block up, I want to get out of my block up as soon as possible and divide, because I'm a sculptor. So I would prefer to solve my problems, you know, sculpt my way out of my issues.
Mm-hmm.
So here we go. And now we set up the visual rhythm. And let's turn this down a little. I like to work in that 5 to 7 range for the most part. The other thing I'm going to do with this is I'm going to squish this a little flatter so it's not so tubey. And oh, like I was saying, the benefit of flatten. So like if this is something that's going to key into something, it needs a nice flat back. I would have come over here and I've done, you go flatten, no, trim front. Oh, I'm not in my brushes. That's why I can't find. Whoa, what happened? Look at that. These came in completely out of order. Bizarre. Man, I had it working for so long and now these come in. Whatever. Okay, so trim front. So frustrating. Anytime you think you know something about this program, you don't. And boom. And so I would come up with that. But now you see that this still has roundness to it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's sort of that bow to it. And the nice thing about flatten is it really drags the stuff in. So we go boom, come here, flatten. Ugh. Okay, never mind. I don't want to do that yet. I was just going to show you a trick, but well, here, we'll do it. Sorry. Listen to me talking around in circles. I'm like, duplicate, delete lower. And so flatten. The nice thing is you can come there and see how it drags everything down and see how you no longer have that bowed edge.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's pulling from the visual view, right? And so now it has a flat bottom, where I would do that with trim front and then use planar flatten. But the nice thing about this is you have a nice cleaner geometry. It's simple, you know, it's not keeping the same count,
Right.
but it's also not loading the edges, you know. So I just find that that's a nice way of doing it. Okay, so let's go back at this guy. Let's hide this guy. Let's flatten this a bit. Come to the front. Let us go back to this, get rid of that. And go to clay tubes. So the thing about scroll work, or at least what I find to be successful scroll work, and sort of a lot of my theory of curving and curves is that successful curves have weight and direction. So think of taking a water balloon, like an animal balloon full of water, and if you start to shake it in an S form, the water will start to go out and then get thin, right? And so that, once again, that sort of contrapposto shifting of the directionality of the weight of the curve, I find really important. And so it isn't always the biggest curve is the fat edge. So let's say we really want to make this point accented. There's nothing wrong with having your weight here and here, and then it's cutting through this way, and then your weight's here. Just however it does, it functions in a flow. And then so you want to determine the rhythm of the part. And so we're here, like, on this one, I think that I will go back, and you will see me do this a lot. I will ditch 2,000 to 5,000 steps sometimes. If I don't like where it's going, I'm going to ditch the model and move on. Because one of the most important things to remember, and especially if you're sort of new, and when I mean new, I mean like a few years into this, you still think that your models are important. There's a preciousness about the pieces. And what you have to know is we all sell, I can't believe I'm going to say this in public, we all sell the myth of the artist. And it's important to sell that myth. But the fact is that you're going to make things that absolutely suck. I make things that suck every day. Where my experience comes in is telling me what to edit and what to throw away. You can't be precious with your work. If it sucks, ditch it, move on. You hear all the 10,000 hours, 20,000 hours, blah, 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 blah. Well, if you spend 10,000 hours on one thing, you're not going to be any good. Redoing, I view like crashing sort of as the universe reminding me to chill out about things, because I've lost untold hours of work. And the fact is that now, don't get me wrong, I'll cuss and scream and stomp around for a little bit, but then I will completely just go back and redo it. And there are certain models, because of how I've composed them or whatever. And once again, I have models that are, my file sizes are like 2 and 6 gigabytes. I have huge files because, well, one, I don't know how to separate files. You can see that I have 30 things in one tool. But, I have big models and I crash all the time. And, sometimes the quick saved work, and sometimes I lose about, 29 minutes. And sometimes it just never really quick saved. It's all bizarro. But don't be precious. I don't care how good you are. If the better you are, the more you suck. And it's just like, there's this mythology that, these brilliant people can sit down and do a brilliant thing. Well, most of the time you see someone brilliant doing a brilliant thing live, they've practiced that 100 times. It's a form that they are so used to that it's now muscle memory, as opposed to a brilliant creation. And don't get me wrong, it could be brilliant. I'm not arguing that point. I'm just saying you will find out, for the most part, it's like these animators, and they sit down and they draw a picture of them, and they draw a picture of them with like something that sort of looks like you, and you're like, oh, look, it's brilliant. Fact is they spend all day, every day, all day drawing that figure. And you find out how many hours they have into creating that object. They know it inside and out. There's no question as to what that object looks like. And so you see it as something that happened in 30 seconds and you're blown away. But the fact is that there's hundreds and hundreds of hours into knowing that form, knowing that shape, and so sell the myth, don't believe the myth, and don't get me wrong, there are people who are far more talented than I am and who are brilliant, but they got that way because of untold hours doing the same thing, developing that stroke, that hand, that vocabulary. And because I think, I find it with my students, and I find it with lots of people who contact me to ask me for help, and just people I work with and the such, is they get tied up to where, you've spent 6 hours on something and it's just not doing what you want it to do. And you're going to sit there and you are going to hammer that thing into a form, and you're going to make sure it works. And you waste another 3 days trying to get it right. Where if you just set it aside, try a different stroke, try a different thing, and you might wind up, after all of that, going back to that form again, but you're going to go back to it with a slightly more informed thing, because you're going to see these two different ways. Oh, I didn't like that, but I like how the ridge happened. Oh, I didn't like that, but I liked how this happened. And now you're going to incorporate that. And so even if you redo your same part, 15 times, you know what? You're now going to understand why that part works and why it doesn't. And knowledge of your forms is how you make good forms,
I love that. Sell the dream, don't believe the dream.
Yeah, sell the hype, don't believe the hype. It's like, Rodin was a brilliant man, but Camille did more than one of those sculptures. It's like,
nice.
I'm just saying, the burgers were hers, just saying. When you look at there's a really great picture of them assembling, is it the Gates of Hell, or it's not called the Gates of Hell, is it? It's the Gates of Purgatory? Or is it the Gates of Hell?
I think it's just the Gates of Hell. I mean, at least that's
the Gates of Hell
term.
Yeah, I get confused. But there's a great picture, and it's like 75 people in this shop, and you're like, oh, Rodin's brilliant. Well, don't get me wrong, Rodin's brilliant, but the fact is these are collaborative processes. I mean, he did like these little maquettes, and then there were other very talented people who helped him do that. And yes, he developed a vocabulary, but at the end of the day, there's a whole lot going on out there that wasn't his hand. And that's perfectly okay. I'm not saying that's wrong, but, sell the hype, don't believe the hype, and I think Camille would agree with me. So you could see, I didn't know where we were going with this, and I tried a few things, and then we go back to something else, and now you start to define those weights and see which way they go, which way they don't go. Mm-hmm. You'll see that I hate lumpy curves. It's something that just gives me ulcers. And I will sit there and like, I will agonize over curves. But, when we're just getting into it. But you can start to see how I use this flat edge, like one of the reasons I use the curve or clay tubes is as I'm laying it in, it has a sharp corner. It has a silhouette that's much more like this, right? So I'm getting these little sharp edges, and that allows me to see where my light is lying. And that's why, once again, I tend to block up and do my initial sculpting at a higher resolution so I can retain that edge fidelity and make decisions off of the edge fidelity. Where here, let's get down. I mean, I've seen things where they're like, oh, 100,000 polys is just a high resolution model. I'm just like, okay. Where you have a lot of people who are doing your block up here. I get it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they're wrong. I just think that in jewelry, we don't use pretend geometry. like going into games and stuff, you can use these UVs and you can use, but at the end of the day, we have to have the geometry to support the print or mill. And so I would prefer to be making informed decisions that I don't have to redo. And I get a lot of kickback because they're like, oh, well, you can't, oh, you put these lines in, you can't get it smooth again. And that's because people forget to use this little button over here that says lower res. And you just go like this. And those important decisions you've made are still there. But I can get my model as smooth as anyone. And once again, that goes back to that sort of CAD mind process. You learn what shows up and what doesn't. And I'm not going to waste time trying to get a photo smooth edge if I'm printing, it's just like, what's the point? I will try to get smooth edges, but I'm not going to angst over it. Because if the detail you're leaving is less than the grit of the investment that you're casting in, well, that's not real. And I think that's sort of that argument I have in the sense of I'm not going to stress about things that aren't going to be real. So through years of doing this, I know what's going to work and what's not going to work. And, I just can't get worked up about a lot of stuff that a lot of people get worked up about. And I try to explain it. I get a lot of kickback from CAD users. So we know that in traditional scroll work, this is sort of a high point because these are all based on these plants. Right? High point, we'll get a little scoopy there. The other thing is rotate your model around a lot, kind of look at it. Because right now you can see that from the front, I'm getting where I want. From the side, the shape sucks. But I want to get the rhythm of the part before I start worrying about the totality of the part. And so I will try to work on it from one direction until I kind of know where I want it to go, know what I'm trying to preserve and get rid of, and then I will take it to the side and start making decisions about where it sits in space. And so at this point, I'm not worried about that, but it's always good to move around because like now I know that this is an issue. And sometimes when I'm looking at my curves and my curve looks like it has a little dent in it, if you just keep working at it at this side, as opposed to coming over here and going, oh, well, look, all I had to do was that. And now that reflection isn't so weird. So keep spinning, keep rotating. And, decide on where you want your rhythms to be, your weight shifts. And you can see, really, guys, I use clay tubes a lot. I'm a sculptor. I'm not looking for the brush to solve my issue. I want my sculpting to solve the issue. And don't get me wrong, I do use other brushes, of course. But like I get asked a lot, oh, well, when are you going to use that? Or what? It's like, until I have things where I want them, I'm not real concerned about much. I'm really just like here, because this is a layer tool, when you cross over your curves, it levels them out a little more. It tends to break up some of those dents as well. And so you'll see me do this a lot. And then I'll come back over and I'll put my line on because that's where I want my light to be. Right
now is when it's really starting to, like, I can start to see the light, the values, the transitions.
Yeah. And so
David, you can connect with Tomas after this. There is a market for 3D printed adult toys. and Tomas will have a lot to share with you, but we got to take that conversation offline.
Actually, yeah. I have a gift for Jaime that I have to mail him.
Oh, great.
Well, he said he wanted it for his office, so
all right.
He's gonna get it. All right, so, once again, now we're starting to make a little bit more finesseful decisions about this curve. So I'm like, okay, I don't want it just to be this and this. We're going to fill this in, this weight. You see what I mean? See how it fills in some of those lumps when you start going this way? It doesn't just add up.
Yeah.
Or it doesn't build up, it levels out. It's really a nice tool. I really like that tool. And so you can see we wound up with some weirdness here because it has backface masking on. Yeah, once again, don't stress about it. Lower your resolution a couple things, tap it, come in, tap it. And you're like, oh, well, you just you just smoothed off everything. Well, when we come back up, it does retain some of that edge fidelity. At this point, I don't care about retaining that, but you can see that it retains it. And then now I can once again come back in, decide where I want my focal point to be, decide the rhythm that I want it to be, come in, deciding this is the high spot floats to the outside, riding along the outside, coming in. All right, so that's kind of the process of build-up. Now, so far, we really haven't dealt with that concept of over and under much. Mm-hmm. So as we were talking about earlier, the linear detail, what you're going to see here, I'm going to exaggerate this a little so we can get the point across. Scoop. And we're going to bubble this edge out a little. Let's give it some weight. Low res, smooth, high res. All right. So one of the things to think about when you're doing these, we're going to go over angular transition at the moment, and then we'll get to layers, is how these and why my curves sell really well. Is because I don't only change my direction, I change the direction of the curves from convex to concave. Okay. And creating complex compound curves create complexity in how light reflects. So remember, we were saying your light is reflecting 90 degrees off that surface. So, and of course, it's not just 90 degrees, but so these are coming off this way. And then these are going out this way, right? Right. And so what happens is, let's go back to that gold. Hold on, let me get this to be a little curvier. So normally I'll have the steeper part of the curve up here and then have it flatten out down here. Mm-hmm. Because this is where the transition is happening. So the more variation you have in this curve compared to this edge, it's going to be a more dynamic transition. So let's go to our, so you can see how this is dark, but then as it rotates around, it's bright here. You're still getting a bright edge there, where this is really just a plain sort of half round, reflection surface. So you can see how my light is drawing my line for me, right? I don't need to come in here and do this, right? This is giving me my reflective surface, right? Yeah. And so that's why this is successful compared to a lot of people will just do this. There's flatten.
Man, I haven't used flatten in a long time.
I know, right? I use the SK trim a whole lot, though. A lot of times how people do these is they get these nice sharp planes. Well, now you see the issue here. You're on. Now you're not reflective. You're not reflective either place. And oh, now we're reflective at this angle along.
Yeah.
Now compare that to what's going on down here at the tip in the same motion.
Oh yeah.
You know, there's a lot more reactivity there.
Yeah, a lot more life.
Yeah, because you have, I mean, see how it crawls around the curve. The light is going with the transition of the curve, where these, none of those are on the reflective plane yet, so they're not doing anything. Okay, so that's a very important thing, contrasting compound curves. Now we're going to do a flat experiment here too. Let's go back to blue so I can see what I'm doing. So the other really important thing is, let's say we're doing flat surfaces. Oops. Bit the wrong curve. Okay, so now let's get this on a slightly flatter thing. Lower res, lower res, lower res, smooth. High res, smooth. Higher res, smooth. And take your time and do it with each step. The thing about this is you can't rush through any of this. Don't skip steps. You think you can, but at the end of the day, you're going to wind up with a better product if you are patient. And I know that when you're working in a shop, sometimes you can't afford patience, but you'll find that in all reality, you're going to wind up with happier clients. You're going to be happier. I mean, do it right, you know. And the beauty of ZBrush is it really allows us to do it right pretty quickly and easily. All right, so let's say these come into this. Okay, so now we're going to turn this into a slightly more graphic surface, but here, let's. So we know that we want this to come this way. We want this to be here. We want this to be in front and that to be behind. So we're going to create, now I'm going to SK fill, and we'll discuss this a little in a second, but so, all right, so I want these to appear to be different layers, right? We're still doing the curvy thing, but now I know that you'll see a lot of things doing this where there's not a lot of transition, but you know, they've sort of turned this into a graphic transition, right? Okay. Let's go back here and let's go to our reflective stuff. And yeah, okay. Yeah, whatever. But these are really the same plane. There's not a lot of, see, as that lights up, and all we're getting are these graphics. And that's boring. Because once again, sort of like when I drew the lines here, the point is that these reflective surfaces are on the same plane, so this will look like a plane with lines in it. And that's not very interesting. Your brain figures out what's going on very quickly, and so it stops looking. The other thing we're doing here is trying to create patterns that the brain doesn't understand on the first round. So it comes back to look at it again and again and again, and it's trying to resolve these visual games that you're playing with it. So let's take clay tubes. Let's go back over here. And so what we want to do is step our details, right? It's the same philosophy as bas-relief, where technically it probably is bas-relief. But where you're actually having transitions of layers as opposed to just lines on those layers. And so we've just done these 2, 3 moves right here. Bump, bump, bump. Right? and I'm not even defining the edge as much. I just cut these steps back, and then we're quick saving 4,323. No. And now, actually, where are we at here? Let me do this. I want to see if I can make this as fundamental as I possibly can. Let's do it flat, because I want these reflections to be real obvious. And then we're going to go, let's knock this back. Trim front.
This is pretty amazing to see this process. Like you keep seeming to destroy it.
I trash things all the time. Now, I destroyed this because I want these to be flat planes, and those were fairly complex. You know, we still had complexity in the curve, and I want these to become just a slightly more very simple, plain stuff going on, so it becomes a little bit more obvious, because you'll lose some of the subtleties of the curved processes. And then I'm going to curve it and show you how the complexity builds by that.
Got it.
And then trim front. Boom.
Squackles. I think, Tomas, you have a Solar printer. Was it a Solar you had?
Well, I have the Form 2, and we did have a Solus, And the Solus is a beautiful detail printer. It's a very nice printer. The only problem for me with it is the build platform is so tiny at 25 microns that, you know, I'm not just for bridal work. Like if you're doing bridal, it's beautiful. I mean, it really does produce beautiful pieces. And also for a lot of my students at the time, it didn't have an intuitive supporting system. And so in turn, you had to know something about supporting to get it to work. And that's where it gets trickier. Now, are you wasting more time trying to refinish it as opposed to supporting and blah, blah, blah. So that's why I was suggesting people, my class, use the Form 2. So, you know, here it's flat. And even though we have these steps, it's still flat, right? And the reason I did this is because curved surfaces are incredibly important, and why I will always say make curved surfaces. So you don't even have to change it that much, but just putting a little bit of curve on these things, as opposed to and let's get this tilting the other direction and put a curve going this way. And so we saw how boring that was. These are completely flat surfaces. And now with those curves, see how they transition differently? And so there's play on the surface. Now, the thing about, let's get back to here. The thing about just doing flat surfaces, or just drawing lines in those surfaces, trim front, let's ditch all this, is instead of just drawing lines on things, what you have is, if you're thinking about this stuff in steps, and so we've gone back to our flat again, if you think about the detail in layers, that have transitions, just like we did on the big curve. We're doing this on a slightly smaller scale. And then this is a bright edge. And then that sort of comes in here, and let's just transition that a bit. So one of the really nice ways of using, I use SK Fill and Twist quite a bit. So SK Twist is a hair brush that I can never remember his name. I really should just write it down so I can give him credit for these brushes. He does like anime toys and stuff. He's a Japanese guy, and his initials are SK. And he one, just beautiful models, but he creates some wicked brushes. And this was a hairbrush, but I use it for detail surfacing because as I'll draw this line in here, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can see how it's rolling that edge. See how it's giving us this rolled edge there?
Yep.
Well, that edge is going to reflect brightly, okay? Boop. And as we roll, see how it gives us this nice bright lip
Mm-hmm.
and then a dark line, as opposed to that, right? This is a complex surface that has this nice robust curl. And so I often use it like this, and it's good. And then I come back with the SK fill, and I just go behind it, and it fills in the back side of the curve, so you're only rolling one way.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I want to do subtle changes, like I want a little layer here, let's say, we have this. This is too high. Let's drop that down. We have this. Which will read okay, right? And you can see by the stepping, it's creating its own lines. We're not drawing lines in. The transition of the surface creates its own line. And this becomes a much more dynamic surface as you're rotating around because it's casting shadows in different directions. It's not just this, right? Does that make sense? And so now this reads very dark right now, but it doesn't read as a complex surface. This surface is the same surface. And your eye catches these little steps. So when you think about adding on detail, think about adding it on as steps, these multi-tiered layering, and it projects light differently. And especially if you take, this, and you do something as subtle as this, we just tilted it. Now let's get that back up there. And so now it's on a completely different reflective plane, and as it rotates, this is going to be brighter at a different time than this stuff back here. Now, but in jewelry, we don't have a lot of depth to play with. We're dealing with 0.5 millimeter, 1/4 of a millimeter, and we have to because obviously if you're just sculpting a character, who cares? Because you can actually, whoa, what just happened there? Oh, I just rotated around. You can build whatever you want. The problem is we're dealing with objects that are, 23 millimeters wide, 2 millimeters thick. And if you have something that's a millimeter off the surface, well, that's a big deal. And so, we have to manage our reflectivity a little better because we have very limited space we're working in. There we have a step. We can come back in and cut a line in it, or we can come back in and use slide and kind of slide edges up. I do this a lot, actually.
And
you can really, you got to turn this lazy snap off, though. See how it gave us that weird kickback because it's trying to connect the lines? That's a new thing, too. But you can see that, you can create a nice ridge, very little height, but by light, it's going to read as a line. Now, if I want a definitive line here, this is when I use twist. And I come in and we roll our edge. This is turned up a little high. And we kind of come in.
And this is SK twist.
Yeah, SK twist. And then I will smooth this edge out.
So that you just leave that nice little bump right before
that bump
edge.
And then I'll come back with SK clay fill and just run it along the back edge of this. And that way it doesn't look like we've completely rolled the edge, but it leaves us with that bright rolled edge. And that is an incredibly dynamic edge. Look at how dark it is, all kinds of directions. It's reflecting light in all kinds of directions. And at the end of the day, we're still, I mean, look at our height here. You know, we have almost no height, you know, so you can get very dramatic lines through these steps.
Yeah.
And even if I were using just a line, let's say I'm just going to come back in here and I'm plotting out with my line tool, you know, I'm like, oh, well, I want something, sorry, turn this down some. You know, I want this to kind of go like this. Well, okay, so we have this detail. I want it to go like this. Well, I will probably come in, do this, come back behind it, do that, flip my mask. We'll get rid of that because we don't want it to transition to that. Blur it just a little. And now, this is where I find the transition tool good. I mean, you know, the ball's fantastic. I can never remember Gizmo, Giddo, you know, but we take this, we have it on the surface. Oops, take this, have it on the surface, rotate it around. And then you can either just move it, but I find that if you hold down the Alt key and move it, it allows you to kind of pull that up, muddle around with it. And now we've created sort of that step lift again. This is at a weird angle. That's why we're getting that. Let's go directly with the angle. Hold down our Alt key, pull this up. And now you're creating those steps, right? And now I would, once again, come back in and I would probably just take this edge down a bit. This is pretty low res for this, so we're having that tessellation. But you can see how, because that's a convex curve, that it's projecting light. See how much it's sticking off of this surface? And that's because it's actually reflecting light this way, where these are reflecting light, you know, up. So by it changing its reflection direction, we have a much more dynamic surface, but once again, almost no height whatsoever. And so that's an incredibly important thing to wrap your head around. Because if you go back to, you know, what are some of the most beautiful small objects in the world? The Japanese sword fittings. If you look at them, they're done this way, where it's, you know, it's done in steps of detail that are going to be reflective. And, you know, it works. What else can I say? It works. Trust me on this one, guys.
That's awesome. All right, so we're definitely heading over our time here. So tell me, is there anything else that you really wanted to share? And then I'll open it up for a couple of questions, and then I think we might be good to go.
Yeah. Don't be precious. Don't be scared to throw things away. You know, think about how light reflects. Yeah. Sorry, we didn't finish my flourish. I was trying to get other ideas around. You go back. Yeah. What do you think?
Well, there we go. Let's open it up for a couple of questions. Last minute questions, guys. I know I got to wait a little bit for the Facebook and the YouTube guys. Anyone here in GoToWebinar have some questions for Tomas? Let me know real quick, and I'll go through some of the ones that you've asked. So Tim is asking, do you use shortcuts to get tools like trim front? And you might want to talk about your customization because your interface is very customized.
Oh yeah. No, unfortunately, I'm extremely dyslexic and I can't type. So I use, you know, Shift, Control, Alt, and all that. And actually, I bought one of those little Wacom remotes. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you have seen these things. It's sort of like a little remote that's your keys. And so I'm a button off. I'm not quite, but it's rad because I can hold it in my hand and I have my keyboard in my lap, and then I use things, but no, I don't use short keys because I can't type, so I have no idea where anything is, and I have to look down to hit it. other than those little control ones. And as you've seen, I don't even get those right. So my palettes are here. My customization, I have my tools. These are the brushes that I use most of the time. And then here I have brushes, like the chisel brushes are here because they're also how you do the alpha brushes. So I want those separated out of my, these are like action areas. My morph brush and Z-project brushes. Down here, I have most of my sort of action brushes, my splits, my merges. And then this rotate, or this pulls in. Nope. What did I just do? Oh man, go away. Where's the? Oh, there it is. So I can come in here. Where's? No, see, I can't find my keys. So I have some of the Boolean issue brushes here, and then I have my and I
wow,
put
that
this
thing
here.
scrolls back and forth. You're using that interface. Let me get rid of the
Yeah, see, it goes all the way over here. So when I'm remeshing and stuff, I have those tools right there. And that way I don't dig around. I'm not digging around. I can just slide it here because this is my Dynamesh, my remesh.
Yeah.
And then my Boolean stuff is here.
Awesome.
And sometimes I've been readjusting my interfaces because I'm back on my 24 inch as opposed to my my little companion, and so this is a little different. But yeah, for the most part, I have my tools over here. Since I'm right-handed now, my brushes are right here. So as I'm sculpting my brushes, I got hit by nuns. Used to be left-handed. Yeah, thank you, church. I appreciate it. So I just, as I'm here, I just come over, I look at my brush and go, because unfortunately I am a ding dong. I can't type. I'm dyslexic. Dyscalculia. I'm just a complete nutter.
There you go. All right. It's a good thing you can sculpt.
Right? I know. I'm good at one thing. I'm like, everyone's like, oh, I'm like, no, you don't understand. I'm good at one thing. And they were like, oh, well, you were good at costume design. I'm like, that's just sculpting. It's sculpting in fabric. No, I'm a one-trick pony. Now that pony might be a lip-a-zinger, but I'm a one-trick pony.
All right, guys. So here's a couple of things to keep in mind. Tomas is going to be here in Laguna Beach, I think 28th, 29th, something like that. What we're working on right now. If you were in his class before, you just kind of come on down. But otherwise, you can head over to jd3d.org. It's jd3d.org. And you'll get all the information you need about it. It's 2 days here, Laguna Beach. It's sunny. It's
sunny.
It's beautiful. It's like living in Greece.
Heaven.
So yeah,
it's pretty rad.
Yeah, I hate it. So
yeah, did I send you pictures of the house in Spain yet?
No. Oh, we need to see that. But I'm gonna send them. All right, guys, and so maybe we'll go paddleboarding afterwards as well. I'm actually going to go rent a paddleboard right after this and go out into the ocean. Have fun. Head over to jd3d.org. Also, make sure that you guys, in case you're not aware of it, in case you somehow missed it, Pixelogic has the ZBrush Summit coming up, and you just head over to pixelogic.com. You can learn about the summit coming up. I think the October 4th and 5th and 6th, something like that. And then
it's worth going to. It's a great community.
Yeah, the fantastic community. And also, Tomas has a session. I don't think is it this next week, but you're on ZBrush Live, so you guys can check out Tomas there as well.
Yeah, and that's a good place for questions and answers and stuff, because that's really not structured. It's really sort of I decide to do something, and then people ask questions, and then I change what I'm doing to whatever they're doing. It's really more of a gather, and it happens every other week.
Yep.
So yeah,
just head over to their Twitch channel, twitch.com/Pixelogic, probably ZBrush Live.
Yeah,
Google it.
I think so.
You'll get it. Don't rely on me. Google's infinitely smarter. Hopefully, I'll get a Google brain when that happens in 10 years.
It is.
Squackles is saying, I totally want to do my own jewelry, but only have access to a hobby level 3D printer. Not enough. My friend, right behind me, I don't know if you guys can see it. That's a Form 2. It is some cash, but I spent $1,800 on, I think it's the most expensive paperweight I have, an FDM printer. It's not, it can't even hold papers because it's too big to hold any papers. It's like, it's just, I don't even know what, I'm looking at it right now. It's like, that was almost $2,000, some Kickstarter thing. I never got that thing to feed plastic through. I never printed a single thing through because it chewed up every single spool of plastic. And $50 a pop for different spools of plastic. I was like, screw that, man. Not going to happen. So get Formlabs. I actually, if you guys, I have a link, a special link. You get a free piece of resin, a free thing of resin, if you use my link. So feel free to email me. I can give you off that. I think Tomas might have his own link too.
I might have. I know that, but it's good because I was talking to the kids or the students in the class, and I said I thought we had the link, but what's his name's in the Pacific Northwest?
I've been talking to their another guy.
Okay, good. I haven't taken that step yet, so
okay.
Cool.
Let me make sure to connect you with them so that you make sure you got your link too.
Okay, cool.
All right. So any questions, guys, you know what to do. Put them down below this. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you learned something in this and that you found it valuable. And if you did, just make sure you subscribe on either like the page on Facebook, subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on Twitch, and you know where to find Tomas. Talk to you later. Take care. Thanks,
All right.
Tomas.
Ciao, guys.
Ciao.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.